I'm going to talk about two buildings today, one in Chicago, well, they're both under construction, and one in San Francisco. I think it's a common theme, clearly, in the urban areas, the more land that's dedicated to high-rise building, the less amount of access there is to outdoor space. And these two buildings, in different ways, are trying to provide additional outdoor space. The first one is there's the development team. Riverside Development is the developer. The site is really a Class A office building site, if there ever was one. It's about 85,000 square feet. It's on the river with great visibilities to the site, from the site. It's a block from one of the largest commuter stations. It's a block from one of the CTA stations. And it has excellent automobile connection with virtually all of the expressways. This is, on the yellow dot there is kind of the location on the river. The inset shows the site. It is presently there hasn't been a building on this site for, let's say, 70 or 75 years, and then it was basically a service building. This building is really, or this site is a scar on the city. I don't know if any of you have taken the Chicago Architectural River Cruise, but it's one of the, I think, only two sites on the in the city that is that had been undeveloped up till now. As you can see, the site is about 23 feet below the streets on each side, primarily because there are railroad tracks running underneath and connecting the various commuter stations. And then in addition, you see this very large residential building that is adjacent to the site. The developer was convinced that this was the best office building site left in the city, but clearly there were a number of obstacles, a number of reasons why that site had not been developed in the last 70 years. The size of the site would have generated, the base FAR is 16, it would have generated easily a maximum FAR of 26 and probably an FAR, total floor area of almost 2.5 million square feet. Among the difficulties with the site is that there were three different ownerships. The site along the river that was that the developer was able to purchase fee simple was a relatively small sliver, and then the other two sites were only available from the standpoint of air rights because of the railroad tracks that were on them and a long-term easement for the use of those railroad tracks. So the developer had to start out buying the first site, hoping that he could make a deal on the second one, and which was Amtrak. And then once in the city, once you own two sites or two sites that straddle a city property, the city's obligated to sell you the site, but there's no discussion necessarily, or there's no definitive way of determining what the price would be. So the developer was really, I think, took on a major challenge. Here you see one of the additional difficulties is the overall constructability. So you can see the railroad tracks running across the two sites on the left, and then on the right, along the river, the Chicago zoning requirement has something, a requirement to maintain a river walk, which is you're supposed to have, that area is supposed to be 30 foot wide along the river, open to the sky. So it was very difficult to really, considering the size of the building the developer would have to build to justify buying the site, relatively small area where you could really put the foundation of the building. So through extensive negotiations with Amtrak and the city, the developer was able to negotiate a few small slivers of walls, concrete walls, that he was able to bridge over the railroad track, and then negotiating with the city along the river, because the height of the open to the sky portion was almost 90 feet in the air, and because the city felt that it was important to develop the site, they overlooked the requirement of open to the sky. And then from a structural point of view, almost all the buildings in Chicago for the last 25 years have been built with concrete core that takes the wind, and the steel frame perimeter, which really takes the gravity load. The wind load is the major load, so not that the gravity load is insignificant, but compared to the wind load, it's manageable. The gravity load is diverted into the core, and then eventually into a 10-foot deep mat that sets on 12 10-foot diameter caissons that go down 100 feet into rock. So by looking, and then the next question was, what would the building be when it's all said and done? Would it be something the developer could actually sell and lease rapidly? With the addition of a tune mast damper, looked like that we could effectively build 752-foot tall building, and as you can see, the floor plate is reasonably ideal for a 29,000 square foot floor. There are 3 different elevator zones, and at that point, the developer was very convinced that it was something that he could build and lease. The only remaining question was the whole public approval process, and the slide doesn't quite show it, but the 122-foot dimension there is the dimension from that residential building west of the site. Chicago, this is in the 46th Ward, and Chicago has a kind of an interesting situation, which is called aldermanic privilege. Nothing happens in a ward unless the alderman approves it. Because this building was over 600 feet tall, it had to go through a plan development. And the first step in any plan development is going to the alderman. There is, in the 46th Ward, there's probably 120 million square foot of office space, maybe 50 million, 60 million square foot of retail space, some other things, but not one of those people vote. And the aldermen are only elected by the residential people in the ward. He was particularly concerned about the residents to the east, and over time, I think we won him over, and the realization that where previously they had all-night trains going back and forth and diesel fuel and bells ringing back and forth, that they would be better off if this would be developed as basically as a park with an office building in it. So the site is about 85,000 square feet. 78% of the site is actually open. I think it will be the largest privately owned public space in the city. And so that's what finally won everybody over. And actually recently the developer has gotten several letters from the residents thanking them for improving the value of their property. So here is a plan of the ground floor. There's the area over the parking area and the casual dining is sort of an elevated park. There's the lobby and then the Riverwalk. So image of the aerial view of the project. Along the river to the right is would be a white tablecloth restaurant. To the left, a conference center. This along the Riverwalk. This will actually be one of the major connections between the people going from the train stations to the north side of the loop on the other side of the river. So there'll probably be somewhere between 50 and 75,000 people going across this every day. There's a view of the elevated park above the parking lot, and you can see the lobby there. This is the entry to the building. This is a kind of a cutaway view. On the elevated area on the left is really kind of a coffee shop area that has access to the park, which is over the loading dock. One of the challenges was to have the lobby with that wall on the right, which is what separates the lobby from the parking garage. And working on that, we are developing a series of video vertical slats that kind of diffuse the difference between the solid wall of the garage and the very transparent wall up above. That glass wall on the left is supported by 90-foot long glass fins that are hung from the building because of the building movement. We couldn't use a cable structure. Those fins are 10 feet on center. It's a view down looking from the kind of Starbucks-like coffee shop with access to the park up above, and then the parking or the lobby. This is a cutaway view of the lobby. You can see the large glass fins. I think there's a very quick video. This is a view of the project as it was probably in its most interesting stage, as the core was up and they were putting up the first diagonal structural members. This is the way it was a couple of weeks ago, so it's advancing, and this is where it'll be in about 14, 15 months. The next project is a project that we're doing in San Francisco with the John Buck Company and Gallup Company. This was a site that was out for public bid from major developers. They were asking for a developer architect team to submit both a financial offer and a design. The developers that we were working with submitted the high bid, and somehow there's just something in this business when you say high bid, it doesn't seem right. It seems like you always want the low bidder, but when you're selling something, I guess the high bid is the one that takes the cake. So I think that it was public knowledge that the bid was about the bid from our client was about $40 million higher, 25% higher than the next highest bid. So there was a lot of pressure from the beginning to make sure that we maximize the buildable area. In San Francisco, it's interesting. It's a little bit different than what it is in Chicago or New York or some other places. The development is controlled by the height and by bulk, not necessarily by floor area. So the first 100 feet, you can occupy the whole site. From 100 to 150 feet, you can have 25,000 square feet. Above that, the next tier is 17,000, and then above that, 12,000. But there's also other minor variations where you can average the floor sizes and so forth. But in order for the developer to maximize the development, we had to virtually build out that bulk diagram in its entirety, leaving almost no area in the site that was not covered. And you can see the three different tiers. The one thing that we did come back with is the idea of having some terraces at the setback, but in addition, balconies, are really not balconies, but large terraces. The ones on the high rise are roughly 1,000 square feet each. One of the things that's interesting in San Francisco is there's always the request for some kind of a narrative to explain the building. It's not a matter of, like in Chicago, where you kind of describe the building and kind of take it for what it is. In San Francisco, you had to have an explanation and so forth. So for us, the explanation was to the north and the west was where the new elevated transit bay garden was going to be, a roof garden over the new station. And to the southeast was the views to the Bay Bridge. And here you can see an example of the ground floor plan. And here is just showing that of the 29,000 square feet, there was only 1,200 square feet that was open to the sky. The grade level is fairly well built out. There was a requirement from the city to have as much retail as we could, so there was no pressure from the city to have open space at grade. It was more, in fact, to add as much retail as we could at grade. I think everyone is talking about how in the office space that there's less square foot per person, that there are fewer closed office spaces, going more to open office space, and that the consciousness of more collaborative space. And one of the things that with the Wi-Fi and smartphones and iPads and so forth, people are no longer completely tethered to their desks. So these are the four different floor plates that show the opportunity where we have roof decks or large terraces, and these are kind of can be extensions of the workforce or the workplace. This is kind of a simple diagram, but here maybe just to emphasize that the building out of 27,000 square foot on the ground floor, there's 25,000 square foot of elevated landscaped areas in the building. This is sort of a, sorry, one back. This kind of an example shows you the size of the terraces, roughly, in this case, about 1,000 square feet. It's envisioned that this would be a view of the Bay Bridge. The concept would be that each individual tenant would be able to develop the terrace in the way that they would think is appropriate for them. But once again, it's considered very much an extension of the workplace and sort of a new collaborative zone. Just kind of diagram emphasizing those aspects of the building. This is kind of where it is in the city. The large Transbay Tower is the largest building to the left. One of the things I think with marketing these buildings is there's a desire for tenants. Many of the tenants, of course, are going to older buildings, but when they're going to a new high-rise building, they don't really want just a glass building that is kind of very anonymous. There's the desire to have a building that has some kind of character and personality. And we felt that these outdoor spaces gave this particular project, although it's lower than the other ones. The top occupied floor is 550 feet, and then another 50 feet above that to take care of all the mechanical spaces and so forth. You looking down on the building, and then this is a view, the two views of the building, emphasizing the roof terraces as well as the landscape roof decks. Thank you.